This channel was built on telling stories. In particular, the stories of those who never had the proper chance to tell them. But what happens when a story becomes forgotten? It is hard to describe how tragic the story of Ivan Orlov is. In terms of radiation dose, he is in a league of his own, hundreds of meters away from the shattered structure of Unit 4, yet a dose higher than even some of the fatally exposed firefighters. He was in fact one of the first to die, and yet his story remains obscure, completely buried by fiction. Now, how did we get here? What is the true story of Ivan Orlov? A person so forgotten, we still barely know what he looks like. Picture this scene. To the west of Chernobyl Unit 4 is the industrial site, where construction work for Unit 5 takes place. It gets shipped across by rail to the final site. Ivan Orlov works here, part of the State All-Union Special Design Engineering Office for Power Plant Protective Structures, Soyuz Energozashita. While the rest of his crew was working below ground at Unit 5, insulating electrical cables and waterproofing the area, Orlov was at their headquarters, when he would have seen the impossible: the fourth reactor exploding, and the glow emanating from its remains. Something unusual happened that night, which was only ever witnessed twice in a disaster in history before. Black rain. Ash mixed with nuclear debris, seeding the clouds of steam produced by the explosion, and causing it to rain back down on everything in its path. When his colleagues returned, some hours later, this water had evaporated, coating everything in a thick layer of black dust. Black dust that was in fact the remains of the nuclear core. And how does one survive this? The answer is, unfortunately, you do not. But why did he stay there and allow himself to be contaminated so badly? Well, this ash was not the only similarity with a volcano, and that is the best way to describe the explosion. From the perspective of Orlov, this eruption came down on him with full intensity, and this included balls of fire. What they were, we can't say for certain, but it was likely graphite that had been heated to the point of incandescence. We actually saw this on the helicopter flight video, the infamous red glow in the reactor hull, that many mistake for the reactor core itself. Anyway, these balls of fire fell on the industrial site and around Orlov, and he took it personally upon himself to fight the fires around him, to protect the building. When he was called and told to abandon his post and return to the safety of Pripyat, he refused, stating that the risk of another explosion causing their workplace to go up in flames was too great. So, he stayed late into the night, until he was finally taken to hospital by ambulance. His colleagues each received a full body dose of between 2 and 4 grays, just by walking over the black dust. Orlov was coated in it, and received an average dose of greater than 12 grays, and hundreds of grays to his skin. This is higher than most of the fatally exposed firefighters. In hospital, doctors were at a loss as to what to do. He arrived with sore gums and blisters around his mouth. But soon, burns would cover more than 70% of Orlov's body, and his gastrointestinal tract was ravaged by radiation damage. They did all they could, giving Orlov a leukocyte cell transplant in the hopes of recovering his immune system. But Orlov would never live long enough to see if they would take effect. Morphine was administered to alleviate his pain, but as the burns worsened, it did nothing to alleviate his agony. He passed away on May 13th, 1986. The cause of death was listed as skin and intestinal injuries. He was among the first victims, dying on the same day as Vasily Ignatenko. It is impressive how heroic a person can be. There is no doubt he knew the danger when he faced the fires single-handedly. Not only did those who arrived tell him, but he was warned hours before that in the phone call. And yet, despite being an employee of the nuclear power plant, Ivan Orlov is not recognised by the Chernobyl nuclear power plant on their lists of employees who died during the disaster. Keep in mind that includes the firefighters. He never received a posthumous award for his actions. This is a similar situation to the crew of the Mercedes video I mentioned before. However, they were not Chernobyl employees. But the real tragedy is the lack of memory about him. Sure, there is the carving on the plaque above his tomb, but for a long time this was the highest quality image of Ivan Orlov we knew about. The second one you see in my video has since been found as well. Photos aside, there is also the story of Orlov. As I said, in my opinion it is the most forgotten. And this begins with simple misunderstanding. Orlov was a construction worker, not a nuclear power plant operator. On the Wikipedia page, the role of Orlov was simply that he fought fires in the turbine hall or restarted the flow of feed water. This has since been updated to reflect the true events, and I thank the people who have been working to update the Wikipedia pages with new and more accurate information. But it does not change the fact that many videos repeating these lists of victims give factually incorrect information that he died fighting fires in the turbine hall or trying to restart the feed water. It is a story in absence of information. But when the professional authors get involved, this is when things get interesting. Welcome to the many deaths of Ivan Orlov. Grigory Medvedev, our favourite author to hate, is up first. Orlov does appear in this book, but they made a big mistake. They killed the wrong Orlov. Instead of Ivan Orlov, he is mistaken for Vyacheslav Orlov, who accompanied Akimov and Toptonov, as well as a few others, to the valve room, costing the lives of the first two in the process. Vyacheslav survived, simply for the fact he didn't venture too deep into the room. As the further down you went, the more radioactive it became. This Orlov is still alive today, in fact, and his colleagues' sketches have garnered a lot of attention for their portrayal of the events of that night. Next up is Dr. Robert Peter Gale, and what I am going to presume is a classic case of mistaken identity, due to misunderstanding a translation. We're going to introduce another character into this story, another one who lived. Valentin Belikon was a paramedic present on April 26th, who survived the disaster but was so badly exposed to radiation that he was among the first group of patients to travel to Moscow, assessed as one of the most heavily irradiated. But he must have been close enough to Orlov in Hospital No. 6 when Gale toured the first time. And the story of Belikon stuck with Gale. Doctor to doctor, risking your life to save others was one of the most heroic things, and Gale was compelled to share the story. Trouble is, he got said story mixed up with the wrong person, and Ivan Orlov was transformed into a heroic doctor. Gale kept up with Orlov's story, and was relieved to see him die, glad he was finally alleviated from the pain and suffering he had endured in his final 2 weeks of life. But again, the unique relief came from a falsehood, and one he would go on to write about in his book about the disaster, The Final Warning. And those who have spent some time researching Chernobyl will have heard that name before. It's also the name of a made-for-TV movie, dramatising the events of the namesake book. Dr. Orlov's heroism is exaggerated, climbing the roof to rescue firefighters. Something not even the real Bellicon did. And guess who plays this fictionalized Ivan Orlov? Ian McDiarmid, the Emperor from Star Wars. How did we get here? So, I return to a question I asked at the beginning. What happens when a story is forgotten? How do you preserve the life of someone? A hero who did not get to share their story.